Hello folks, and welcome to TRP News, a weekly production of the United States Rational Progressive Party. This week we are going to have updates on ISIS and the Affordable Care Act case before the Supreme Court. We're also going to talk about Israel and American partnership in the wake of Bibi's speech to Congress. And we're going to have a discussion, a little bit of discussion about something that's very important to me, is the question of why should you vote. First up is the Affordable Care Act case before the Supreme Court. The case is hinging on one line of the Affordable Care Act, which was passed into law, also known as Obamacare. And a lot of people are talking about this and this challenge, but no one's really telling you what the line is, what the dispute is. And so what has happened is that there is a sort of an error in the law as written, because the presumption was that states would establish their each individual exchange for people to purchase health care. Well, that didn't happen, as we know. I think something like 26 states have not created an exchange, so people had to go with a federally created exchange. Well, the line in the law says that these subsidies that people get to purchase health insurance from the IRS are available to those who enroll in a state exchange. And since some 26 states don't have a state exchange, the challenge is saying that these subsidies are in effect illegal and not allowed. The exact wording is subsection 2, premium assistance amount. The premium assistance amount determined under this subsection with respect to any coverage month is the amount equal to the lesser of A, the monthly premium for such month for one or more qualified health plans offered in the individual market within a state, and that's the line, which cover the taxpayer's spouse, or any independent as defined in Section 152 of the taxpayer, and which were enrolled in the exchange established by the state under 1311 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. So the language says established by the state, and as we know, several states haven't established exchanges, so the question is the IRS legally allowed to give these subsidies? So the question of standing is that these people who live in states which are not allowed to quote-unquote get subsidies are being harmed because people with state exchanges are getting subsidies, and therefore it's unfair. So the question before the court is, should they interpret that as written, which means that you can only give subsidies to people who are enrolled in a state exchange, or should they interpret that under the intent of the law, which is in dispute? What is the intent? But everyone knows that the intent was that every American would be able to get a subsidy. So this is what courts do. They take laws that are written, language is imprecise, and especially when you get big bills like this, there are things that are open to interpretation, misspellings, poorly written language, or just things that don't end up working out logistically. It just can't happen. So the court interprets what actually is written and what was meant, and comes up with a ruling as to how the government is supposed to operate under the law, and what the interpretation is and what's appropriate, given the Constitution and precedent. So that's what we're talking about here, is essentially what is the court going to be deciding here, on what basis. So there's the strict constructionists, the people who say you just read the letter of the law, whatever it says is what it says, and we're not supposed to interpret anything beyond that. Now that's just a joke, because every Supreme Court justice and every judge says that until it's something they really care about, or they think is too important to just read by the letter of the law. And then of course they go by legislative intent, which is the other type of interpretation, which is legislative intent, which a court is supposed to go by, which there's precedent for. The legislative intent, what did the legislature mean? So this is why I said last week that, most likely I think the odds are better than not that, this is going to not fly. The Supreme Court's going to send it back and say, the intent of the law is that people have federal subsidies, and regardless of the language. And the IRS has made a rule that's clarified this, and that we should go by the IRS rule. Well, because the legislative intent is clear. So what is called when that happens, when they say, hey, we don't want to read into this something that's not supposed to be there. They call it a Chevron deference, which basically means that it's a precedent where courts defer to agencies if their interpretation of the law is reasonable. So the IRS's interpretations of this law is that everyone gets a subsidy, which seems entirely reasonable since everyone talked about it. Everyone knows that this is the intent of the Affordable Care Act, that everyone gets health insurance, and everyone gets help if they can fall into these certain categories, and that everyone's covered regardless of what happens in the states. And then another principle that goes along with that is that courts should not interpret a statute to produce absurd or unintended results. So obviously the intention is that there are subsidies for everyone, and it's an absurdity to say that we only meant for people in state exchanges. Well, we meant that everyone would have a state exchange, which didn't happen. So there you go. Again, I still go with my interpretation. That people are reading into this. Scalia said that, and Roberts didn't say anything, and but ultimately, I don't think Roberts is going to flip on this one. It's too much of a stretch. It just seems crazy for this little esoteric line in the law for him to step back out and join the conservative side of the bench. Just for this, when everybody knows it would be absurd to assume that people aren't supposed to have a subsidy. So that's what's going on with that right now. We'll post the entire code and the citation for you to take a look at, and you can see for yourself and decide what you think. Okay, next up we had Bibi Netanyahu here giving a speech to Congress. There was some controversy about that. Like I said last week, who really cares? The guy can come speak, and he can say what he wants to say. It's really just a bunch of showboating on his part and on the part of the Republicans of Congress. And, we're not going to listen to let Israel decide for us whatever Bibi thinks and has been quoted saying that, we're not going to be manipulated by them or go and do something stupid or have him decide what wars we're going to fight. So my question is, today is in the news that just came out in this last week, we supply Israel with millions and millions of dollars every year to protect them for their defense, for their military, and other aid. And this last week it just came out that Israeli officials are asking for $317 million more than was already budgeted in the proposed budget from the administration. Now, the money is supposed to go for 2 new missile systems, one called David Sling, I believe, and the other is Arrow 3. And basically these are, not missile systems, but anti-missile systems. Systems designed to shoot down various types of missiles that might come Israel's way. Since 2011, the U.S. has spent $1.2 billion supporting the current missile system and Israel. The current missile system is called the Iron Dome, which has been pretty effective. You probably heard about this. Maybe every once a year one missile gets through. And anyway, most of the missiles that are shot from Palestine are pretty ineffective when it comes to this defense system. But last year, U.S. lawmakers pushed to have Israel. Now, this Iron Dome and the defense systems in Israel have, for the most part, been built by Israeli contractors. Well, U.S. lawmakers have been saying to Israel, listen, you got to spend some of that money in the United States. So now they've got Israel to agree to spend at least half the money here in the United States with defense contractors. Well, that's big, big business. And The list of defense contractors includes Boeing, Raytheon, Orbital, ATK, and Northrop Grumman. So those are some big names and big money and big influence in Washington. And with that 317 million more, in just a couple of years, we're going to be spending billions more dollars. An additional $2 billion doesn't go to Israel. It goes to Egypt and Jordan to keep a peace treaty with Israel. Basically, we're paying off Egypt and Jordan so they don't attack Israel. And another $500 million goes to rebuilding what Israel destroys in Palestine. So this is a huge interconnected flow of money going to some big players and big names, and basically the U.S. taxpayers footing the bill. Peace process, Bibi over here in Congress beating the drums of war, and who's paying for it? You and I. So that's the state of affairs as it stands right now, and has been going on since I think 1948 is when we started supporting Israel. And we'll see how far it goes, how much more money gets spent, and where it all ends. Okay, and next up, an update on ISIS. So a few things happened this past week. Last week I said one of the important things to me when we're talking about these conflicts of ideals, now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize the nature of ISIS or what kind of government or what kind of organization it is, but when we have these conflicts of ideals, the question to me, the first question is, can people leave? Are people able to decide they don't want to be a part of it and walk away without fear for their life, and do they have somewhere to go? And I told you we'll be talking more about the whole refugee situation in the Middle East, and that is a huge problem. But for now, this past week it's been reported, and I think this actually came out in January, but it's just now getting press, is that the ISIS issued a fatwa. A fatwa is basically a religious rules clarification. It's like if Jesus came out and said, well, that 10th commandment, what it means is, and he give you a paragraph on how it applies to your everyday life. So that's what a fatwa is, and this fatwa came out, and it had several points. Among those, you can play foosball, that's allowed, as long as there's no gambling. So no gambling is a big no-no in most of Islam anyway, along with drinking and that sort of thing. But you're allowed to play foosball. And women are allowed to carry AK-47s as long as they don't sling them over their shoulder in such a way that it ends up showing their figure. So that's the primary concern about women and machine guns. And then the pertinent to what I was talking about just a second ago is people apparently are not allowed to leave. So two of the fatwa rulings are, one, it's illegal to sell passports that will allow people to leave ISIS-controlled areas, and two, that widows of ISIS fighters, if they attempt to leave the ISIS-controlled lands, they should be punished. That's what the ruling says. They should be punished as a punishment and a deterrent to prevent other people from trying to leave. So that pretty much answers that question I asked last week. No, people are not allowed to leave, and that pretty much tells you everything you want to know, basically, about ISIS. You can't leave. You might get burned alive. You might get beheaded. You might get whipped. So this is not a good situation. Basically, we're still fighting over there. There's what are we going to do here and there? And as I said last week, bombing is not much of a solution. Of course, we have Iraq now, which appears to have gotten their military act together, and they are taking on ISIS. I think this week was in Mosul, which comes in the wake of them destroying a lot of artistic heritage and statues and museum artifacts and pieces and things like that, which really seemed to fire people up. They reopened the museum, and they began a military initiative into Mosul to take these people out, kick them out. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll keep you updated. So that's what's going on with them right now with ISIS. Yes, you know you cannot leave, and these guys are bad news. Okay, and last up for this week, I want to talk about voting. Okay, and I hear this all the time, and it drives me crazy. So if you're one of these people, I hope you listen. People say all the time, I'm not going to vote. I don't vote. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. What difference does it make? People, let me tell you something. If you're one of those people saying that, you're missing some information. That's all I have to tell you. There's some things you don't quite understand. Voting is not all about electing the president or electing a senator. Voting is not all about what happens in the federal government and what happens in Washington. Voting matters every day to what's happening to you right now where you live, in your city, in your town, in your county. Voting matters. So it's important. I believe it's important, and I hope I can convey to you the importance of voting. You heard about Ferguson, Missouri, and the riots and the shooting of Michael Brown. You heard about all these things, and whether you are against Michael Brown or for him or whatever you think about what happened, you saw the response in Missouri that was way over the top, a militarized response, shooting tear gas, CS gas, which, by the way, is outlawed around the world. It's illegal to use in warfare, but they were using it on citizens exercising their right to protest, to march, to be in the street, and they were shooting at people, firing non-lethal weapons or less than lethal weapons, and that's the kind of response we get to people who are exercising their constitutional rights to peacefully assemble. From the NCLR Action Fund, there is good reason why Ferguson's mayor, city council, and police department aren't responding to the needs of the community. The majority of the community didn't vote to represent their needs. As a board member of the Missouri NAACP put it recently, we warn people about these kinds of things. Who hires the police officers? The police chief. Who hires the police chief? The mayor. Who hires the mayor? Who elects the council folks? The answer is clear, the voters. Okay? So what you're getting when you don't go out and you don't elect your local officials, it's not even the federal government, it's your local officials, your city council, your mayor, your judges. You go before a judge, that person may very well be elected and they're deciding what's right or what's wrong. And you just abrogated your responsibility to make sure it's someone who's going to be fair to you. Okay? If you live in New York City, this past midterm election, which most people don't go out and vote, you would have voted for the governor, the lieutenant governor, the comptroller, the attorney general. All the senators were up for election, state assembly members, and all the U.S. congressional representatives, and judicial candidates, again. Okay, so, and federal government, now people are talking about the presidential election. Federal government, if you do not want the Republicans, we have this issue in the conservative court, the Supreme Court. Everyone says that the ACA should be fixed, it should be worked on, it should be improved, but the conservatives say get rid of it, period. The Republicans say get rid of it, period. They don't like it, they don't want it. Okay? That goes against the majority of the country. Well, you keep letting Republicans nominate all the justices, then the majority doesn't matter. Just like Bush supposedly, quote unquote, stole the election in 2000, that's what can happen. If the judge does, we talked about strict interpretationists, and we talked about legislative intent, and we didn't discuss judicial activism, but judges wield a lot of power, and there's no recourse from the Supreme Court except writing a new law. If the Supreme Court throws out the Affordable Care Act, there's no recourse. We have to write a whole new law. Everyone loses their health coverage. Everyone loses the subsidies. And you want to worry about rates going up, rates will skyrocket, okay? So voting is so important, okay? Not only did the things I just listed, if you live in New York City, but there were 3 ballot proposals on the ballot. One was establishing an independent commission to draw the lines for voting districts. Now, if you don't vote, then you probably don't think too much about districting, and this is a big one too. Independent districts, I talked last week about the Arizona legislature suing the commission out there, which is independent, because they're mad because they don't have any say in the drawing of the districts. Well, every legislature comes in and they try to draw the districts in a way that's favorable to them. So what happens is, this is why people cry term limits. Term limits, we don't need term limits. What we need is fair districts, so that people run and you get a fair division of votes, so that we get people elected who actually represent everyone as much as possible. Well, you would have, in New York City, you would have voted to establish that commission. If you didn't get out and vote, then the legislature still will control how the districts are drawn. That means it's a partisan approach to district drawing. If you are environmentalists, another ballot proposal was letting the legislature email or basically electronically transmit the bills before they are voted on. What that means is there's a law in New York State that says that the bill has to be on the legislature's desks a certain amount of time, 3 days or something like that, before the vote in order for it to go up for vote. Whether or not it gets passed, whether or not it gets approved or voted for or against, they have to right now, as it stands, if you're environmentalist, or you care about trees and waste and using too much paper, they have to print out every bill and send it to every legislature 3 days before the vote, whether or not that bill passed. And right now they are not allowed under law to just email it to them. So if you didn't vote, you just killed a whole bunch more trees, okay? Finally, the last thing that was on the ballot was money for construction and equipment for schools, for education, for improving various schools around the city. So if you lived in New York City, then you had an opportunity to tell the city to invest in school and education. If you believe in education and you believe in supporting schools, then if you don't vote, you just miss an opportunity to do that. Okay, so it's about a lot more than just electing politicians who are all the same, and we'll talk more about this all the same meme more in the future, but it's about a lot more than just electing a president or electing your senator. It's about deciding the direction of your community and deciding the direction of your county, your state, and what the priorities are in your budget, and who gets to decide what's fair and how things are run. And that's why it's important for you to vote, because if you don't vote, I mean, just to say that your vote doesn't matter, if you don't vote, of course your vote doesn't matter. If you don't vote, why should a legislator listen to you? You don't vote. You don't participate. You don't care. So, you want to, it's just contradictory to say, I don't vote, and then complain about politicians, because they're not going to listen to someone who doesn't say anything. If they're not going to go out and knock on your door and ask you what you think when you don't participate. So please, vote. Encourage your friends and family to vote. Start getting ready for this November and next November. It's not just 2016. It's these voting opportunities come all the time in your city, in your county, and it's important that you participate. Don't just sit by. All sorts of things can happen, and you might not like some of them. Okay, so that's it for this edition of TRP News, a production of the United States Rational Progressive Party. I'd like to thank you for watching. We'll be back again next week, and take care.